You haven't changed in all these years. So full of yourself. Always did think you were the best, even with the ladies. Isn't that right, Don Juan of podcasts?
Welcome to Spawnography, everybody. I'm Pierce. I use they, them pronouns here with.
My name's George, and they, them, or she, her.
Well, the moment is finally here, George. We're going to find out who killed Al Simmons.
Who killed Al Simmons is exactly the question.
The Don Juan podcast. Who is the Don Juan podcast, you think?
Oh God, not no one I listen to. That's for sure.
More importantly, who's the Don Quixote of podcasts? And is that Joe Rogan?
Probably, because he's always going after some imaginary shit. You know who I bet is the Don Juan of podcasts is the guy from Case File, because he's totally anonymous, but his voice is like so like smooth Australian. He's always just like, and then they found the dead body inside the car.
Oh man, if Spawn was real now, that there would be a true crime podcast about Spawn, and that will be our that's going to be our Patreon exclusive. We're going to do a true crime podcast
Done.
based on what we know, an in-universe Spawn true crime podcast. Todd, also, if you'd like us to do this officially, we'll do it.
Yeah, just get in touch with my attorneys. We'll call it Courageous Ambitions, the Al Simmons story, which is the name of his biography.
That would be incredible.
There would be, bro, it would just be like Pat Tillman. Like, Al Simmons is kind of the Pat Tillman, because we will reinvestigate in this two-parter the fact that Al Simmons is a world-famous government assassin. When I say world famous, that's not a weird hyperbole. Everyone knows him, and it's a big deal when he dies. And we're going to find out about it.
Yeah, and it's not like, oh, general public, this guy you didn't know about. No. You were well aware of him. He was voted people's sexiest man alive.
World like famous government assassin.
People know him. Yeah, so we got a two-parter for you today. This is the Coco Swiss is over. And we're here with Spawn number 12 and 13. Story and art by Todd McFarlane once again. It will not be long before he cedes writing and art duties for another few issues. But for now, we do have this two-parter.
The lawsuits are not going to tend to themselves. He's going to take time out of your workday.
And also the general day-to-day of Image Comics, you know, I think that the business of not just being a writer artist, but also being a publisher, and being a publisher with a bunch of your friends and having to juggle those responsibilities and those relationships and those personalities, I'm sure does come at a price.
Yeah. I mean, by this time he's definitely running Image, and also, you know, McFarlane Toys is coming up here. There are a lot of characters in this issue that will get early McFarlane Toys, I think, as a result of them appearing in this two-part issue. This two-part story of Spawn. We'll get into that. There's some funny stuff around that.
Yeah, absolutely. But let's get right into it, since we got two issues of stuff to cover, and they are probably the densest issues that we've covered yet.
Yeah, there's a lot of prose here. These first few pages are basically very dense, and there's going to be a lot of that through this, so we'll try not to get too bogged down in it.
When we last left Spawn, I was in Frank Miller's issue, where he was helping to figure out, he was helping the folks in the alley that he lives with, his friends, not be the
it was a little convoluted
gang war between creeps and nerds who
the
are
nerds and the creeps.
Cybernetically enhanced gangs in New York that seemingly nobody's doing anything about.
We'll find out more about that in a little bit from Sam and Twitch too. They do touch on the nerds and the creeps. This two-parter to me feels a lot like a response to the Cocoa Swiss. The Cocoa Swiss.
Yeah, it's definitely Todd being like, "Hey, there were 4 issues of stuff that I did not get to comment on directly, and I'm gonna do it now. And also, those guys forgot about the basic tenets of Spawn, so I'm gonna remind you."
Yes, a lot of this comic is a lot of words for Spawn to go, my wife, my wife.
Yeah.
Todd, the Todd father, clearly wants to get back to the core of Spawn in these 2 issues. And there is a lot of, in the prose, in the very text heavy comics, there's a lot of, I think, some of Todd's most interesting writing so far. Maybe a little fraught, maybe a little overdone, but there are points where it's really enjoyable to read as well. I think that he spends so much time on these big blocks of text. Like the first page is a semi splash page of Spawn's cape flitting in the wind as he perches on top of a church with a huge text box that takes up a good third of the page on the side.
Before we get into it, I'm just gonna read the credits.
Oh, I'm sorry. I
So
thought
we're
you already
jumping.
did.
Oh, it's all good. We're jumping right into Spawn number 12, Flashback Part 1, story and art by Todd McFarlane, letters and editor Tom Orzechowski, color by Steve Oliff, Ruben Root, and Oleoptics. Oleoptics is Tracy Anderson, Denise Bien. I'm definitely pronouncing that wrong. I'm so sorry, Denise. Kathy Ennis, Emily Jordan, Patty Stratton Jordan, Kirk Mobert, Abel Mountain, Leah Rude, Marie Rude, Mo Sampson, Quinn Suplee, Kiko Taganashi, and William Zindel. Director of Creative Development, Terry Fitzgerald. Graphics Coordinator, Julia Simmons. Whew, that's a lot of
Wow.
names to make a Spawn
So
comic.
before we move on, I just want to say Oleoptics is a lot of people, which I think is cool. They named everybody. I doubt all of those people worked on every issue of Spawn because I'm sure they were doing other colors as well. I think it's really cool and interesting that a lot of those creators, it sounds like a lot of them are women. Coloring and being colorists was something that was one of the few pathways into comics for women. It was kind of like being a film editor in the 60s and the 70s, really through the 80s. There were a few, but it started to open up more later on. Anyway, just a cool note that coloring is sort of like the film editing of the comics world in that way.
Yeah, and Marie Javins did colors for quite a while, if I'm
Exactly. She
not
was one of
mistaken. And
Marvel's, like, she did all of Marvel's covers for a long time and was, I think, one of the art directors under John Romita for a long time.
and is now at DC as their publisher.
Yeah.
Correct.
So, yep.
So
If
this
I was wrong on
this
any of that, ignore me.
yeah, well,
I don't think I was.
this issue is dedicated to Shell Dwarf. If that name is not familiar to listeners, Shell Dwarf founded San Diego Comic Con.
There you go.
So it's just Todd paying it forward to some of the folks that allow his career to continue. This issue, I mean, its cover date is July. I think I misspoke where in issue 11 where I said like, oh, it's maybe it's 11 issues in 13 months. I believe Spawn was the only thing that was running pretty much on time. So the cover dates are actually fairly close, as opposed to many other Image books. So in the first 11 issues, that would have been about 13 months total if you just go by the cover dates.
I just want to
So
get one note
yeah.
in real quick. I was talking about Marie Severin, not Marie Javins. I'm so sorry. Marie
Oh, hey,
Severin was the
that's what it
colorist.
is. Whoops. And that was kind of my fault. So
That's okay.
thanks,
That's okay.
George.
Just wanted
Good
to catch that. For once, my memory didn't fail me in the moment. So, yes, moving on. This is coming out probably around the time of Comic Con. It's at least cover dated for it. And
Yep.
Todd McFarlane, the Image guy, has definitely made an impact at San Diego many times. San Diego is also where the eventual debate between Peter David and Todd McFarlane would happen. Maybe even, I think it might have been the next year, about whether artists or writers are more important to comics. And I'll go ahead and go on the record and say artists.
I'm going to say colorist specifically.
Perfect. All right.
Hey, also, I'm going to correct your correction, Marie Javins. also a colorist.
Oh, yeah, you're right. I didn't mean that she wasn't a colorist. I'm sorry. We're getting so in the weeds on this. Marie Severin was the person who was coloring all of Marvel's covers for a long time. So you get what I'm saying.
Issue 12, page 1.
Issue 12, page 1. There's a lot of text on this page. About a third of the page is taken up by this big block of prose on the side. And basically all of what it's saying is that Spawn's a hellspawn. He was brought back to life from hell after he died by his own choice, made a deal with the devil to see his wife again, and it cost him everything because now he's a soldier in the army of hell. And he's the only one in this century so far. But there have been others before, like Medieval Spawn, who we met. There's a lot of these big blocks of text here, and a lot of it seems to be Todd being like, well, none of them in the Cocoa Swiss said anything about my wife. None of them had Spawn sitting on a church just crying about his wife. Maybe they did, but nobody got into the weeds about Wanda and the impact of Wanda and Al Simmons' relationship on the now undead life of Spawn. Following that, almost to make up for the text page, there is a 2-page vertical spread that, again, you got to turn the comic sideways. It's a spread we've seen Todd do many times at this point, maybe every other issue of Spawn at least, where it's just a big Spawn sitting on top of a church. He said this church has brought him back so many times and he doesn't know why. Maybe he's thinking of his wedding to Wanda. We'll get into that in just 1 second, but this page also establishes that he's having memory issues, trying to figure out how he died in the first place. He's figured out how he came back to life. Now he wants to know how he died. He's been dreaming of skeletons. He's been dreaming of his old boss, Jason Wynn. And now we're going to get a little more into that.
Yeah, and I kind of like Todd being back after a few months. I think I complained about the vertical spread the first time it showed up in issue 1 or 2. I like it as a reestablishing of like, hey, we're kind of back. It feels a little too soon to be like, oh, we're back to basic Spawn kind of. But
back to what Todd McFarlane seems to be excited about with Spawn.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this mystery has been brewing for a while, and Todd is eager to. We probably would have found this out a lot faster had there not been the criticism and the timing of the Cocoa Swiss, the criticism of Todd's writing abilities.
Right.
So I kind of don't really mind that he jumps back into it. It must be a little frustrating for Todd that it feels like he's written the same prose about 8 times now.
See, here's the thing. That's what I question. It might be frustrating to him, or it might just be him doing like Hey Kids comics, where like every comic, somebody's first comic, you want them to know what's going on as soon as they get in. And also, like you said, reestablishing after basically a 4-issue diversion. The thing about it to me is that kind of empty page as the first page of the comic, which almost always opens with a splash page, followed by 2 pages of splash, followed by so much text, really feels like indicative of the overall pacing issues that kind of become, especially in this first year or so, the big hiccup and hurdle that has to be overcome. Is a lot of this repetitiveness. Now, I will say, we're going to get a little more into the life of Al Simmons here, not just in the, famous murderer Al Simmons way, but also seeing who he is as a person. And I actually really like this little sequence here where he's remembering his wedding and he's thinking about his wife's grandmother, Grandma Blake, Wanda Blake's grandmother. And they have a nice little scene here, some repartee where we establish that she loves Al. She thinks he's so funny, just a funny guy, and he's making jokes. And one thing I like, wife guy Al Simmons, famous murderer Al Simmons, is also feminist Al Simmons, because Grandma Blake asks, why won't Wanda take your name? And he has this really nice little spot that he says, it must have been the 50th time we've had this discussion. I told her the same thing I did the other 49 times. I met a Wanda Blake. I fell in love with a Wanda Blake. I've been dating a Wanda Blake. And now I was married to a Wanda Blake. Wanda Simmons sounds like my sister. Which, like, you don't need that last little bit, but it's funny. It's a cute line. And also, I kind of just think it's a nice bit. It really shows that Al and Wanda loved and respected each other.
Also, Todd's wife did not take his last name.
Nope. I think this is another bit of like Todd's life coming into Al's life. And I also want to say real quick, I love Grandma Blake. We're gonna see her more. I was a little kid where every old lady was my grandma. I just love Grandma Blake. She's just really has a nice, sweet air. And the conversation they have later also that kind of calls back to this is one of the nicer bits in this two-parter to me. It's one of those things where it's like we're really seeing what Al Simmons lost and also what Al Simmons' family lost when he died.
It's the kind of thing that does really humanize Spawn in a way that the Coco Swiss issues,
Coco Swiss.
they kind of feel like, oh, that's territory we can't tread.
Right. It seems like almost like that's the one thing that Todd was like, you can fuck with angels and demons, whatever, but my wife.
Yeah,
That's Todd. Todd wife guy
yeah.
Todd.
Leave the human element kind of to me. I'll take care of that. These pages, also Tom Orzechowski, the absolute goat. There is so much text that, and I don't know if in the compendium it is fixed, but like I'll even forget. Like you got to forgive the spelling errors because it probably got given to him like that. But
Yeah, and also he had to do so much lettering across these two books because I'll go ahead and say a lot of the art not very good. We'll get into why in a little bit, but Todd was definitely on a deadline.
yeah,
That's the TLDR. But like okay, on this page there's Al and then there's Terry. The coloring here is a little off. Their skin tones are a little funky. I take it to be the haze of memory. But
yeah,
also, I do want to say this drawing of Terry Fitzgerald, the mustache look looks like it was added on by the same team that took away. That looks like the mustache that was erased from Henry Cavill's face. Like it looks like they CGI'd a mustache into a comic art drawing.
yeah.
It's
This
definitely there after the fact, and you can tell it's only there to make sure he looks different from Al.
and also the only other thing that really differentiates him much from Al is his hairline a bit and his eyebrows.
Yes, I don't know what the coloring doesn't help. It's got a green haze over it, which I take to be like kind of an element of memory, but the skin color makes them look very weirdly pale, and that
Hmm.
translates across to like the way the character designs look. And that mustache just looks like definitely drawn by someone who's never drawn a mustache before. At least not one like that. So, and that brings us to the next little bit, which is Al freaking out for a moment about remembering that Terry Fitzgerald, his best friend and best man, is now the husband of his widow. So Wanda Blake is now Wanda Fitzgerald, took his last name, I think, if I'm not mistaken.
No, 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 no,
No,
no.
no, no. Okay,
She
never mind.
doesn't.
She didn't
She
take his
doesn't.
last
And
name.
we'll get
Okay.
to that scene with Grandma Blake where she says,
That's right. That's right.
yeah,
I remembered that the other
quite the
way.
opposite.
You're right. My mistake. Thank you for correcting me. But also, Terry is the father of Wanda's child, a child that Al could never give her that they tried for many times before his death. It was apparently the one thing that was off about their perfect dream life in which he was a famous murderer.
Yeah.
And that's the point of the next two pages where we see that it seems that Wanda and Terry are perhaps investigating Al's death because although it was claimed that he died in the line of fire, he actually was killed by one of his fellow hitmen, Chapel, who will become one of the other main characters of this two-parter. But here we see Jason Wynn telling his agents that they need to go threaten Terry Fitzgerald and let him know that they're on to him and Wanda about their parent investigation into Al's death, which may also actually be Al investigating.
We know that it's Al because
That's right.
Al broke into the
That's right.
weapons
I wasn't sure if
cache.
they were like referring to that or not, but I think you're right. That
Yeah.
is what they're talking about. But there's because they think Al is dead, they're assuming it's Terry and Wanda.
Right. Well, the thing that's kind of crazy about this book is that the pacing of the story overall is that had this issue come out before the Coco Swiss, it would have come out
Coco
more in line.
Swiss.
It would have, think about it, it would have come out as issue 8,
Yeah.
and issue 6 and 7 is right where overt kill, like that whole fight happens, right?
Yeah.
So
Which
all of
gets
these
mentioned in
events,
this as well.
right? All of this, the timeline has gotten weirdly stretched also because we did the Cerebus thing, and
Mm-hmm.
we also found out that like only a couple of weeks had transpired over the first bunch of issues.
Right.
But at the time, and this is really before double shipping, and there's like a little bit of, of a delay for early Image Comics. Like I said, 11 issues in 13 months or so, 13, 14 months. So you're really expecting a lot from readers to either remember or go reread. That is why it's good that all this stuff gets
Recapped,
repeated,
yeah.
and why this was like kind of the norm for quite a while. I tend to like that comics, especially when you and I were reviewing them week in and week out more regularly, that they just went with the recap page. Hey,
Right.
here's like, let's get you caught up, and now the
That
characters can just do character stuff.
yeah, that's sort of like picking up in like last week on like kind of it makes a kind of cleaner transition. It cleans up the
Yeah,
pacing a little bit. We learned that they think Terry and Wanda are actually doing the investigation that Spawn did. They go threaten Terry. We'll learn that they're going to keep surveillance on them. But before
yeah,
we get to Terry again, before we see Wanda and her family, we go visit Grandma Blake. I really like this sequence. First off, I like the art. Granny is drawn in a very caricatured way.
yeah.
It's I like the coloring here a lot better. I really love this picture on the second page of this 2-page sequence with Granny. This drawing of Spawn with his eyes all wide. I love shocked and sad Spawn with his eyes wide. For some reason, that expressiveness really adds to a lot.
It's frustrating when you can tell that Todd's on a little bit more of a deadline and he covers things in shadows,
Right. I also think
because
that's a
I think
fact of Spawn's face.
yeah, I think it is, but I think in terms of when he's not just being menacing and he needs to show more emotion, which he is able to do through the mask quite a bit. We didn't even mention it in the like 2-pager where he's remembering his wedding, but we get this kind of like in the top left corner of those 2 pages, we get this sort of like resolved Spawn with his little, bottom lip kind of out,
Yeah, and
and
his
he's
eyes
and
are
he's
all
got this
pointy.
glare, but then he looks so sad by the end of that sequence.
Yeah.
And even that is just a little bit of underrated storytelling there, that like you're kind of seeing him melt into this like sadness,
Yeah. Yep.
in
At the
this
memory of
memory
his
that's like,
yeah.
yeah, it's great. It's so good. And so then when he sees Grandma Blake, the first time we see Spawn, he has that fully dark, like kind of what I'm talking about, right?
I
It's just
think
eyes and mouth, and he kind of looks angry, and then it that melts away too, right? In a small way, just meeting up with her again and talking to her again,
mhm.
it's Al kind of reclaiming a little bit more of that humanity. He looks a little bit more human than he generally does. He still is horribly disfigured.
Yeah, he's wearing like a ball cap with an Image Comics logo on it and like a coat. I want to say on that first page, him being bathed in shadow is definitely a choice. It's not necessarily, I don't think it's necessarily born
Yeah,
out of like a deadline, that part. But I do want to say when he's first walking up to her, his eyes do look a little more menacing. But you're right. The minute he starts talking to her and she's telling him, thank you for telling, he basically goes up to her and he misses her. He says, Granny, I'm here to tell you, you're going to go to heaven. There is a heaven and a hell, and you are the best of us, and you are going to go to heaven. And she immediately recognizes his voice, and she's like, well, I'll see you there. And he says, not me. Not me. I did bad things. And she says, you protected your country, which, like, he still murdered a lot of people, Granny. I know that that's very sweet of you, but that shows the
this is
perception
a
of
more
Al.
Canadian understanding of how the U.S. military works.
But also you see that perception of how of how Al is perceived by his family as a hero and by the world at large. Like Granny doesn't know he goes and murders people with a guy whose face is a skull. But that's why I like this drawing of Spawn on the second page so much, because there is that expressiveness and there is the shadows drain away from his face a little bit. You see a little more of his skin, and he asks her if Wanda still thinks of him, and she says yes. She loves you more than ever. We'll all be reunited someday. And he thanks
Yeah.
her for that and leaves. Now, next page, we get talking heads again for the first time in several issues. I'm shocked Frank Miller didn't use these. Maybe he just either didn't know they existed for him to use, or he just didn't think of it, or he wanted to avoid it because it's basically, a very similar.
We talked about it last episode. That Frank Miller issue feels like they Marvel they kind of Marvel methoded it. Marvel method, for listeners who aren't aware, is just where you write a few paragraphs with a general idea of what what the story is supposed to be. You let the artist kind of draw it as they
Determine
see
the
fit.
pacing, figure out how it's actually going to go, and then
Yeah.
at
And then
the end,
the writer just fills in the bubbles, essentially. Figures
fills in
out
the
what they're
dialogue,
saying,
scripts
what
it.
they're supposed to be saying.
So here we have these three talking heads again. We have CNN, Viacom 6, and I think that guy's thing changes every time we see him.
It does. I think he gets fired over and over
That's what I
again,
was
which
thinking.
is really, really
He's
funny.
the reactionary guy is getting kicked out of the channel after channel. Then we have E Entertainment, the canonically gay Spawn host. The first bubble.
Spawn's first queer character.
That's right. The first bubble from CNN fills us in on kind of what's been going on in Spawn's world. Mafia connected criminals are dying. They were killed by the Violator. They think Spawn is connected. They also believe that young bloods are involved, which is kind of the blanket term that gets used for superheroes a lot of the time in this world because of young blood and the mythology around that mythos. And then they mention overt kill, the Sicilian bodyguard overkill, which, like, does that mean that they think he's like Iron Man to Tony Stark for Tony Twist / Vito Gravano?
That means he's also famous.
Yeah, that's wild. Murder is it's like the gladiators out here.
I do kind of like that at least they put information in front of us in a way that we can sort of...
It's another version of a recap page in a way.
Yeah.
I
would almost not mind if that was the first page.
In a way, yeah. I think Todd likes opening on some version of a splash. The other thing is spineless Viacom 6 guy, the reactionary guy, is calling the creeps and the punks spineless whelps. Because back in his day, you didn't fight with guns that could level a city block. You got out there and you fought with your fists like a man.
By the way, when he belonged to gangs.
When he was in gangs. Which that's the kind of thing that is honestly kind of a fun bit of scripting. Because if you ever listen to like any of these reactionary guys, like Mike Warnke is the primary example of a guy who was like a Christian reactionary comedian and commentator, and his whole thing was that he had been a Satanist and then he had murdered all these people, and he was now confessing to a crime that had no say. Anyway, that's a whole side thing, but it's kind of one of these things that the reactionary guys like to do. Bill O'Reilly or something would sometimes be like, in my day when I would fight in the streets, and it's like, okay, go pop more pills, Grandpa.
Yeah, fuck it, we'll do it live.
Yeah, fuck it, we'll do it live. The other thing is, I think it's funny that he's like, he's like, I think it's all moronic, but what can I expect from a bunch of teenage techno nerds? Which, like,
sure.
Yeah.
Great. They are cybernetically, as we've established, the gangs of New York are cybernetically enhanced.
Yeah, they're basically like cyberpunk gangs from the year 2033. They're all wearing the Apple glasses. And then the funniest part of this page to me is the guy from E being like, in a major coup for Paramount Studios, executives have purchased the film rights to Mark Curtis's bestseller, Courageous Ambitions, the Al Simmons story. Which is so fucking funny to me. The unofficial biography delves into the political arena to show us just how demanding it can be working as one of the president's errand boys.
Courageous Ambitions, as we established, will be our Patreon goal. If enough people give us enough money, we will do an in-universe true crime podcast called Courageous Ambitions, the Al Simmons story.
Welcome to Courageous Ambitions. We're going off on so many tangents that we're like 4 pages in on this. We'll speed along in a little bit. But first, I just want to say, the last little bit of this, he says, this just in, we've received word that the agency handling Youngblood's very own Bedrock has run into some legal snags with animators Hanna-Barbera over name use rights. So in Youngblood, there was a guy who's kind of like the thing named Bedrock, and he shows up in this 2-parter as well. There's a little more to this joke later on. But the reason it says that is a little kind of the Todd father clowning on Rob Liefeld a little bit. It's a very ironic little bit of jackanapery. And I want to go ahead and shout out Brian Cronin's Comic Book Legends Revealed for actually getting in touch with Rob Liefeld to find out about this. Because that raised a question in me. Was there an issue with Hanna-Barbera, and is that why his name was changed from Bedrock to Badrock? The answer is,
given all of Todd's
legal issues, well, that's going to be very funny.
Possible.
It feels very possible. And here's the thing. The 6th or 7th issue of Youngblood, he changed his name from Bedrock to Badrock. And the reason why is apparently that Rob Liefeld was nervous about legal action from Hanna-Barbera because they had just announced the Flintstones movie. And so he thought Flintstones is coming back. They're going to catch on to this comic character is named Bedrock. He even has a catchphrase, which is Yabba Dabba Doom, which is stupid but kind of funny. I kind of like it. And so to preempt that, to make sure that there was not going to be any issues, Rob changed it from Bedrock to Badrock just to nip that in the bud. But the funny thing is, Todd McFarlane thought he was an idiot for doing that and thought that if he was ever challenged legally, he would have no trouble winning the case. Which, if you know about any of Todd's legal troubles, that is some very keen insight into the business and legal mind of Todd McFarlane and how well that works out for him in the long run.
Always perfectly. He's never lost a case.
Never once. So, moving forward, we catch up with Sam and Twitch. We learn that they have been suspended because of Billy Kincaid and what happened to Billy Kincaid. And part of the reason they were suspended, and this was news to me, is that when they found Billy all stuffed with popsicle sticks, which is something they bring up over and over, that he was stabbed with popsicle sticks. When they find Billy, it's in their office. It's not in his house. Now, I didn't catch on to that when I was first reading it, and I think when we talk it through, I think I said they rush into his house because that's what it seems like is happening. There's not.
I think you're right, and also Spawn hasn't met Sam and Twitch yet. He's not interacted with them, and there's no reason for him to specifically put Billy
it in their
Kincaid
office.
In their office,
right.
Because these characters still have not engaged with each other.
No, but that's something that Sam and Twitch want to change because they saw Spawn at Billy Kincaid's house, the Red Cape friend.
That's the closest they've gotten.
Exactly.
I guess theoretically Spawn saw them too, but like,
how would he know? There's a whole, it's a whole thing.
Whatever.
It's Todd doing a little bit of kind of joining the magnets, trying to make the plot beats work from between the last issue before the Cocoa Swiss and all the issues of the Cocoa Swiss.
Yeah.
Or not the last issue before the Cocoa Swiss. I'm so sorry. But a kind of diversion issue that happened before the Overt Kill two-parter. So we catch up with them. They laugh at each other a little bit. Sam's like, oh, isn't life grand? Because Twitch tells him he doesn't smile enough. And Twitch is like, I enjoy your sarcasm. So we catch up with Wanda next. This is a kind of a sweet moment with Wanda and Terry and Cyan, where we learn the little kind of funny bit that when Cyan means yes, she says nope. Which,
by the way, once again, got to be a real thing, right?
I was going to say, seems like another little tidbit from Todd's actual daughter, Cyan.
Sometimes right what you know is bad, but I think when Todd does it, it does lend a lot of reality to.
It's very endearing.
These characters, and it is very endearing, and like
it's very humanizing, like you said before, and it's a much more natural kind of writing for him.
Oh yeah, this stuff doesn't seem forced at all. Whereas when he's like going on about good and evil, sometimes I'm like, yeah, all right. Like I get that you read that in other books. Whereas this, I'm like, yep, this is exactly he lived this scene. Like he lived these 2 pages.
He sure did.
In my copy, this scene is interrupted. Oh, I have a question for you with the reprint in the compendium.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
So after Terry meets up with Wanda and Cyan, and that last panel, are there green lines on them?
No, that is probably a coloring error that is part of the printing. That seems like a printing error.
It's weird because it's along their arms and stuff. Like it follows their shape. It seems like there's like a sniper or something targeting them.
Huh.
In
That's
the
weird.
print version.
That's weird. Like I'd have to see it, but there's no green lines on them at all. So that seems to be something that's unintentional. My guess is,
or it's something that just doesn't track because it doesn't really track with what happens in the next part of the scene. I will say that for me, this is interrupted by a Rob Liefeld pinup that we were promised issues ago of Blood Wolf.
Not Lobo. Distinctively, legally, not Lobo.
Definitely not Lobo. He maybe only has 8 fingers. Moving on.
So Terry's drawn a lot better here. I really like his face, the surprise and kind of
Oh,
joy
it's
he
great.
seems to be feeling as he's playing with Cyan and they're walking in their house. There's two guys waiting for him, but just a green lines thing. It could be, and I know sometimes brown and gray, especially like grayish browns, can print weird, like on paper.
Mm-hmm.
Especially if it was maybe like an RGB, ironically no
I'll
cyan on it.
I'll throw like
So I
a
haven't
link.
seen it, so I can't say, but
It's real weird, but I think you're probably right.
it
I
could
thought
be
of
an
it.
issue with printing the color.
Yeah, I thought of it as like, well, they are getting staked out or whatever, so maybe the intention was that this panel was like through
Mm,
goggles or something, and then that never
just didn't
happened,
work. Didn't translate.
and so it got changed, and maybe some of it didn't get changed. Getting in the weeds about
Yeah.
coloring
Just an
on
interesting
one
tidbit
random panel.
though.
Yeah.
So we get the moment where Jason Wynn's government stooges basically threaten Terry over what they think is his investigation of Al Simmons' death. They also tell Jason Wynn they're going to be staking him out. From there, we head to the alley and we get another thing that Todd likes to do, which is write really funny, stupid jokes, including a lot of fart jokes. Todd really piles it in, but it's also kind of endearing every time he writes Spawn with his alley buds. They're just hanging out, chilling, getting ripped as shit on
I
some
think
sweet berry wine.
anytime anytime that he doesn't have to move the plot along, I'm having like a great time hanging out with Al and the Alley guys.
Yeah,
Like
that's the
when he has
thing.
to like move the plot along or remind us things that have happened before, then I'm like, come on, buddy, like get on with it. And also, this is where Orzakowski just gets to have a great time, or maybe he
Oh,
hated it,
he's
but I doubt it.
carrying this. Whether he worked his ass off and hated it or had a ball, he's carrying these 2 pages. They're singing the Flintstones theme song here, which is again
Yeah.
another joke about Hanna-Barbera's not going to fucking sue you, Rob. I can put the entire text of the Flintstones theme song in here and reference it enough times. The funny thing is, there's a little note down here: Flintstones theme song, copyright Hanna-Barbera Productions, which is another just Todd laying it on thick with the like jabbing at Rob. And that kind of is a sort of meta moment in this whole sort of sequence where they're all just jabbing at each other. It's all just a bunch of drunk alley guys getting hammered on sweetberry wine and calling each other names and laughing about each other's Jurassic farts.
And Spawn is drinking, which Frank Miller established
He didn't
very
do.
specifically that he does not drink.
So between last issue and this one, he's seen enough to finally start hitting that bottle with his buds. I do think it's funny that somebody's like, I love Dino. And this one guy goes, screw Dino. He's a pussy. Which, like, that's a lot to be. I mean, even in the 90s, like, they weren't calling Spider-Man a pussy. So they're just drinking and laughing and yucking it up. And one of the guys goes to take a leak and he finds Spawn's mask, which Spawn is not wearing because obviously he's drinking. Now, this guy is named Garib. They all say he's got the best stories. Now, the funny thing about that is Garib is named for Garib Shamus from Wizard. I think he was the publisher and president and founder of Wizard magazine. So that's another thing Todd likes to do, for better and worse, is name people after people in his life, like Spawn's wife Wanda and Cyan, named after Todd's daughter and wife.
And the back ad for
Wizard
Spawn number
magazine.
12 is
And
Wizard Magazine.
Wizard did a whole Spawn special. All the people you need to know, they're very interlinked. Spawn gets a lot of love and a lot of attention from Wizard, and in turn, Todd does a lot of advertising for Spawn and Wizard. Very symbiotic relationship right now in the 90s when they're both at their height.
Especially and considering the Shell Dwarf dedication in the beginning too.
Exactly.
It's just like, again, Todd paying it forward to
A
anybody that
little
has
bit of
like helped him
attention to
along
the
his
press.
journal. Yeah.
Want to just shout out Wizard real quick and say, much like the death of Superman and the article that I read when I was a little kid, Wizard magazine was the aspirational goal for me when I was like 14 and thinking about writing about comics. Ups and downs, problems, whatever it may have been. I that makes me kind of like this. And the reason I know about this is because of Wizard, because Garib Shamus loved it. Garib puts on Spawn's mask, and because Spawn's suit is alive, starts choking him. Spawn manages to save him, and he's like, I'm so sorry. This is not my fault. I appreciate your humor, because Garib cracks a joke when he gets the mask off. He says, but I don't think this is funny. None of this is funny. I can't contain the costume's movements. If it senses an enemy, it has a mind of its own. So please just leave it alone. Then he has a vision. And it seems like maybe he's thinking he's drunk because there's all these green bubbles. But suddenly he remembers the man who actually took his life. Who is, of course...
Dun, dun. And we've seen this skull across multiple issues. But it looks very close to the Spawn logo. So it's not necessarily...
That's kind of, I think, on purpose. Like, it's blending with the Spawn logo. But here we see it uncovered. We see it as the distinctive makeup of none other than Chapel.
We didn't talk about the cover of this issue, which is that skull that we keep seeing.
Another iconic Spawn image. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. With the kind of bullet hole shattering the Spawn side.
Yes.
Is
indicating that it's Chapel who killed Spawn, of course. It is a great cover. Spawn had great covers at this time. So this last page where Spawn's disembodied face is kind of screaming, "No! Chapel!" and this big splash of blood. We see Chapel with his big, giant, gnarly knife and his huge gun. This is very much what the toy looked like. I think he came very specifically with accessories based on this splash page. It's another great kind of Todd page where it's just like a really cool splash page. You can tell that he loves drawing these. And he loves focusing on a character and giving us all these little details like the blood running down his arms and all the bullets all over him. The bullets kind of echoing Spawn's chains. It's a cool, cool little page.
Yeah, it's great. I have a question about Chapel because I don't know that much about.
There's a lot to not know about Chapel.
What's going on with his teeth? We can get more into Chapel for the next issue, but like we're about to cover. But like,
I think at first they're an affectation because, correct me if I'm wrong,
it's a mask.
It's makeup or a mask or something. It's maybe both. I think they're just decoration, and we'll get into that later. But he does have those sharp, pointy teeth, which will become a thing at the end of issue 13, which we're now going to get into. Some of this, I think we're going to try and get through a little quicker. A lot of it is just big blocks of text.
Yeah. So that leads us to Spawn number 13, Flashback Part 2. Story and art by Todd McFarlane. Letters and editor Tom Orzechowski. Color by Steve Oliff, Ruben Rude, and Oleoptics. Oleoptics is Tracy Anderson, Denise Bien, Kathy Ennis, Emily Jordan, Patty Stratton Jordan, Kirk Mobert, Abel Mountain, Leah Rude, Marie Rude, Mo Sampson, Quinn Suplee, and William Zindel. Director of Creative Development, Terry Fitzgerald. Graphics Coordinator, Julia Simmons. Thank you, listeners, for bearing with me while I make sure that everybody that worked on this book gets their own credit. I know that it probably sounds a little bit like I'm just repeating the same names.
Some of them are actually a little different.
I'm not keeping track of Oleoptics staffing changing. This issue is dedicated to one of the greats, gone too soon, George Perez.
George Perez, honestly, canonical, saintly, one of the best dudes to ever do it. His art was incredible. As a person, he was wonderful, a friend to everyone who loved comics. I had a lot of intersections in different communities with George Perez, even outside of comics, friends of friends who knew him for just his personality, and hearing his name even now, I'm starting to just feel a little verklempt. I met him once or twice, and he was always just the most wonderful dude. I can't say enough good things about George Perez and how delighted I am to hear that dedication.
I do think it makes a lot of sense because Youngblood, if I'm not mistaken, Youngblood is Rob's Teen Titans pitch.
Yes. Edited. It absolutely is. It absolutely is. And it was a Teen Titans pitch. That's why Shaft is basically
Red Arrow
/ Arsenal / Speedy, whatever. There's also, it kind of became, once he took it to Image, it kind of became his catch-all of like, what if there was a super team that had Speedy from the Teen Titans and Captain America and The Thing and a bunch of other characters that I'm ripping off. Or, I'm sorry, distinctly legally creating new characters that are totally legally distinct creations of Rob Liefeld. I don't ever want to fucking hear from him about this.
Second Patreon goal is that we'll do the true crime podcast about the creation of Youngblood.
Yeah. It couldn't be him. the first page of this issue, for the first time, not a splash page at all. And now this page, this issue, I think we talked about this beforehand. You might know a little more about this than I do. Very much under the gun deadline wise.
Yeah, he's going to get more, and we'll get into the letters columns in both of these issues and sort of the editor's notes and stuff in both these issues after we're done going through the book. But it's clear that everything is catching up with Todd a little bit and with Image Comics.
Yeah, like running a business, like we said.
Yeah, running a business is hard, and there's a lot of folks with different personalities and needs trying to help run the business. And also, Todd McFarlane's about creators' rights. These are all creators, and so everybody gets a seat at the table, and that leads to some, pretty long meetings. That said, I think that this is, again, if you know anything about Todd, he did play baseball. He got hurt, broke his ankle, or hurt his ankle in some way. He married a woman named Wanda. They met in high school, and this story does have the line. It does explain that Al Simmons also used to play baseball. He was nursed back to health by Wanda.
Yeah.
It does have the line that night we made love till the sun started coming up. My foot still throbbing. She made me forget everything.
Honestly,
her touch eased my mind and drove me crazy at the same time. And that night, our loving each other, it was all so perfect, so very, very perfect. I mean, write what you know.
I kind of want to say two things. One, this is just a page from Todd McFarlane's diary. Like literally just, he was like, just take something out of my diary. But it's very sweet. It's not like,
nice.
it's not like the way he talks about like making love and being together. It's not like gross or like, what's so puerile at all. It's very sweet and romantic. The one thing I want to say is this page is just text, no art whatsoever. If the opening page of the last issue was a like truncated splash page with a third of text, this has the power bar, which is rated at 7926. And then the only art on the page at all is Tom Orzechowski's lettering. And he does do a lot with that. He does a lot of sound effects. He does a lot to separate Spawn's memories from the word bubbles. It is a masterclass in how the fuck to make a comic page that's only text and still has storytelling on it, which is very difficult to do. Go ahead.
Why is the power meter there?
I think the power meter there is because we haven't seen it in several issues and because it's going to become something important to Spawn later. Also, though,
should it have been at the end of the last issue is my thought. Like,
maybe so.
Did that memory trigger the power meter somehow?
It's possible. I can't tell if it is meant to be a storytelling decision about what's happening to Spawn as the last issue ends. Way to break up the page. Way to remind us it's there, because Spawn will remind us it's there later on himself in this issue. Yeah, it's set at 7926. So if we're going, Spawn's maybe used a little less than 30%, maybe around 20% of his power.
Yeah.
We don't exactly know how because he hasn't done a whole lot. It seems like teleporting takes a lot.
Yeah. These next two pages are a lot. I understand that what it is a Spawn voiceover over like a scene that we're going to catch up to, like we're going to transition into. I think it's done kind of poorly.
It's not great. The layout and pacing.
I don't think that the Badrock stuff really matters. It's Badrock playing video games, and you could ignore all of that and just read the sides, but a lot of it is stuff you kind of already know.
It's basically a lot of it is Spawn recapping that Chapel is the one who took him away from my wife. Chapel is the one who killed him, sold him out. Chapel was always one of the worst dudes in the unit. He had no conscience at all, bloodthirsty, didn't care who he hurt to get his job done. And he thought that he was the Don Juan of killing because he always hooked up with a lot of chicks, the Don Juan of killers. So we're getting a lot of that. We're also getting a little bit of recap about what Youngblood is and the fact that he's part of Youngblood, Chapel. Youngblood was interested in Al Simmons as a candidate. It's basically a program that turns people into superheroes. is my understanding. I literally could not give less of a fucking shit about Youngblood. I'm so sorry.
Basically, yeah. We've mentioned already that there is going to be some crossover with Youngblood. We're not going to read Youngblood. You can read Youngblood if you want. It's not a good time, in my opinion.
And you don't actually have to read any of that shit to understand these two issues, which is kind of a good crossover in a way. We're getting a lot of reminder of who Chapel is. We see Youngblood is training, Die Hard using his shield, Die Hard legally distinct in all ways from Captain America.
Die Hard also created on Stan Lee's comic book greats.
Yeah. I guess
by Rob Liefeld.
That's right.
Also legally distinct from the John McTiernan movie.
Is the big green guy in the armor, is that Geiger? Is that who they refer to later? Like a Geiger counter? Though they spell it Giger, I guess. I don't know. I don't fucking care. I'm gonna be honest.
When we get through that, though, we get a great 7-panel page. Spawn showing
of actual comics,
and it rules.
One thing to say about this is all the characters on this page, except maybe Giger. I can't tell if they mean it to be. It's spelled like H.R. Giger, but it seems to be maybe like a Geiger counter.
Yeah, I don't know.
These guys all become toys in the Spawn toy line. You get Die Hard, you get Shaft. I don't think Die Hard comes with a shield though, funny enough. Maybe he does. You get Chapel. So all of these characters that guest star here, pretty much Todd's idea at some point is we're going to make them all toys.
Yeah.
And they were cool toys too.
I was just going to say, I've said this about Liefeld designs around this time. Yeah, they look good as toys.
They kick ass as toys, honestly. Like the X-Force toys were great. The Bad Rock toy, I loved. I can very strongly remember the day I got the Bad Rock toy because it was the same. My sister got to pick out something in the store too, and she picked out a Goofy movie. And I remember very strongly watching a Goofy movie and playing with Bad Rock. So anyway,
you wouldn't think it, but they got goofier.
They did.
With the second one, it was extremely goofy.
Gosh. Yeah, this next 2 pages is Spawn doing his butt check, suit up with his cape, reminding himself one last time before he goes to take out Chapel what it's all about.
I also love the big, the full body reveal of Spawn.
Yes.
I think as much as the last issue felt like it was a little under the gun deadline wise, man.
This one has some spots that feel like that too, but it's got some cool shit.
Yeah, it has some really cool stuff. And I think it's partly because there's a lot less text. It's not trying to... once we get through those first opening pages, there's less text. It feels a lot more natural. The pacing kind of figures itself out a little bit.
Yeah. It feels less like an interstitial episode of a TV show it's less of that filler issue where it's bringing you back into Spawn's world. And I don't necessarily think the last issue was filler, but story-wise, it was a lot of just catching up with Spawn.
Right.
And learning this one big secret.
If you didn't love the last 4 issues of the Coco Swiss, here's Spawn again.
This page of Spawn on this reveal of Spawn, also that image, another one that was pulled out a lot and used in advertisements. There's a lot of that, and a lot of these Spawn images that Todd McFarlane draws do become very iconic throughout the 90s because of their use outside of the comics. He breaks into the Youngblood headquarters. He sees the Chapel's right there. He knows he could fight all these other guys, but he doesn't want to. I like this last little bit here where Shaft says, "Make a move, mister, and I'll have 20 agents on your back. Don't know how you got in, but you're not going to walk out." And Spawn says, "Make your move." It's he focuses on his eyes like that little gunslinger, they're in a standoff. I want to say these next 2 pages are kind of interesting. Bad Rock runs at Spawn. Oh yeah, we get a beat earlier where Shaft calls Bedrock, calls him Bad Rock, he calls him Bedrock, and Bedrock says, "It's Bad Rock, remember?" So he's changed his name by this point.
Goofing on Rob Liefeld.
Spawn is engulfed in green energy, and he calls himself a modern-day Dracula, who I thought was really Vito Dracula Gravano, the crime boss. Todd loves that Dracula metaphor.
This means that he's figuring out teleportation more specifically, right?
Yes.
I know that he kind of did when he was able to get into the weapons cache, but this is a reestablishment.
This is like
no,
his
no,
third time using it now after killing that guy with it in the last issue.
Yeah, he really. Oh yeah, I forgot that he does that too. So he
It's like the
really
one
gets
thing you want to use
teleportation
his
now.
powers on. Yeah.
Yeah.
I really like this drawing of Bedrock, Bad Rock. I love his face. I love the way his little jaw works. I kind of think that's the best drawing of him throughout this whole two-parter.
It's funny because he has like a goofy version of his face.
Yeah.
Like a more cartoony version, and
He
then he's got
does.
the more like thingified kind of
Yeah.
version.
I
And
kind
I
of
like
like the
this
way he
one too.
draws him, but I like that one a lot. I think he has a lot of fun drawing his face. And, just as a person who geeks out over comic art, I want to just notice when even little bits of it are really cool and fun to look at. He leaves Youngblood there and teleports Chapel to Botswana. Youngblood's like, we're going to track him with his tracker. He says, time to show the bad guys what happens when you try to mess with us being Youngblood, if Chapel doesn't kill him first.
As we turn the page, we're going to go check in with Terry Fitzgerald and Wanda, because since they've been kind of investigated by Jason Wynn's security, they haven't had a discussion about what happened. Like, we didn't check in with them again. Do like that Todd has a little bit of a checklist where he's like, I did this, I got to do this. I did this, I got to do this. In terms of like bringing a character in, unless it's a one and done like Grandma Blake where we don't really need to see her again, right? That's two
Yeah.
pages that gets us in and out and does what it needs to do.
Right.
But like Terry and Wanda are recurring characters, and we do need to know what's going on with them. And so it is a little bit, sometimes I think it can feel a little like script writing 101, but it is really good. And what we know about Terry and Wanda to this point is that they both wake up in the middle of the night with Al Simmons related anxieties,
Yeah.
which I have to imagine like puts quite a strain on their relationship. But Terry's here and he's restless because he knows that Jason Wynn's people don't just show up for no reason, and he's worried that this puts Wanda in danger, well as their daughter.
Yeah.
And Wanda even is like, hey, can you talk to me about this? And he's like, no, I can't, like, not yet. And it's because he really wants to figure out what's going on. He wants to know why he's being investigated, because he knows that they did blame the agency for Al's death, but that was a while ago now, and they've kind of moved on, and he's not currently investigating anything, and he does not know Al is Spawn, so
right.
He's just having some anxiety.
We get another check-in on the next page, which is Sam and Twitch. There's a little old lady telling them all about how she stabbed her neighbor in the ass because he was busting up her doghouse with a chainsaw because her husband totaled her neighbor's Porsche. It's the whole thing. And Sam, you can tell, it's just like, yeah, great. Fucking great.
Things that happened at the Image House?
Yeah. Oh, undoubtedly. The guy hit himself with his Porsche. Twitch comes in and he says, I can't believe it. She says, I just can't believe he called the cops. Twitch comes in and says, excuse me, sir, good news. The board will be releasing its decisions tomorrow. If we're acquitted over the Billy Kincaid thing, then we can be back on the streets by Thursday. And Sam says, thanks, Twitch, because I'm going to find our little red friend, Hero, that day and let him know what I've been going through. He owes us, Twitch, big time. So we're one step closer to finally a confrontation between Sam and Twitch and Spawn, which has been a long time coming. Now, after several pages of catching in with the people we haven't caught up on from the last issue, we finally get to Botswana. Chapel's like, where am I? I've never been here before. There are no Hulkamaniacs here. And Spawn's like, surely you didn't forget. And Chapel's like, I didn't forget. I never knew. I don't pay attention to any of the places where we go murder people.
So canonically, Chapel has never known where he is when he's working. He knows where he is when he's not working, but canonically, he doesn't pay attention to the landscape.
He doesn't give a shit. Mountains, snow, any other type of world that you could have in Mario. A desert world, a cowboy world. He doesn't care. They're fighting. He's like, doesn't know who Spawn is. These drawings of his knife they make less and less sense every time we see it. It looks like he's just holding a huge piece of shattered glass. It's
also like, where does he keep that thing?
Well, he was holding it when he teleported out, but nonetheless.
Right, but like, he doesn't have a sheath on him. And what kind of sheath would like easily...
That's a great question. That's a great question, Pierce, and I can't answer it. So the next page is the start of their fight. They're just going back and forth. Spawn's basically taunting him. Chapel's like, you don't know a thing about me, not a goddamn thing. And that drawing of his face, boy, if
He
the
looks
other
like
page was
Lobo,
great,
kind of.
I don't even know what the choice was being made here. He does not have his skull makeup on here, is important to note. This is just his face. His teeth are normal, so he's not wearing whatever the skull thing is, the mask, I guess, or makeup. He's not wearing that. Chapel doesn't understand who Spawn is. Spawn is like, have you not been listening to me? You killed me. You stole everything from me, and you don't remember me. But look at what you made. Spawn's like, I guess I made a mistake trusting you. And finally reveals who he is to Chapel. Chapel gets it finally when Spawn says, you haven't changed in all these years. So fool yourself, blah, blah, blah. The thing I said at the front. And then it reminds him that he called himself the Don Juan of Killers. Or that Al called Chapel the Don Juan of Killers. Chapel finally gets it. He goes, what did you call me? Dear Lord, Al? We get a little recap of the fact that Chapel was told to kill him by Jason Wynn because Wynn told him that Simmons was a traitor. What was actually happening was that Simmons didn't want to keep killing for no reason. We get the reveal that not only did he kill him, he shot him in the head with a laser gun that fried his brain to a crisp.
So closed casket funeral for Al Simmons.
Yeah, we see his brain being blasted out of his head here.
Yeah, which this is going to lead us into another like 1987 version of the Talking Heads, where we're going to get some more discussion of world famous government assassin.
World famous government murderer, which also want to say slight shock when I saw 1987 and realized that is when he would have died if it was 5 years before 1992.
Yep.
Once again, math not my strong suit.
This is where we find out that in 1985 Al was voted one of the 10 sexiest men by People magazine.
Yeah, one of the 10 sexiest men is our government assassin. Basically like if Chris Kyle had come home and started doing porn.
Did you watch Jean-Claude Van Johnson?
I didn't.
Okay, do you know the premise of it?
Which is Jean-Claude Van Damme gets recruited to be an actual assassin?
Well, the thing is that he's always been an assassin.
That's
right.
And
that the movies that he made were always covers for his
so it's
assassin
like a
trip.
So he's basically like
one more job.
Confessions of a Dangerous Mind kind of thing.
Yeah, but this is kind of the opposite because everybody knows he's an assassin.
Right, and
nothing's covering it up.
Well, here he's just one of several soldiers that are killed while in action in Botswana fighting against rebels that are against the United States. Now, my view on 2, which is where our reactionary guy is in this era, is calling on basically calling that a conspiracy or a lie, as it is, because he's like, what about the other 42 dead soldiers? Is only Simmons going to be granted sainthood? And he's basically calling into question the government narrative that Al Simmons died as one of 43 soldiers, and only Al's name is being honored and released, and he's questioning why that is. I mean, I kind of get where he's at, and he's saying, nice move, Mr. President. Great timing. Nothing like a good war and a dead hero to help bolster your standing. Then again, I could be reading too much into this. Now, I'm going to go ahead and say I like that he's criticizing Ronald Reagan in 1987, but
that's true.
He's not wrong here. This is maybe the time when our reactionary guy is kind of speaking a little truth to power. The one time the broken clock is right. Although at the same time, he's basically like, we need the names of the other 42 heroes that served.
And we're going to get out of that bit of exposition about the past back into the fight with Al getting whacked in the face, which is great. It's nice to just see, like, I don't know, good old fashioned
superhero action a little bit.
I also really like that, Al always gets drawn with his green eyes and we see his teeth a lot. When Chapel is fighting him, we get red eyes, and he does kind of look like Blade.
He does get a little bladey.
And I like that it is me, Chapel. I'm dead, all right, but not dead enough that I can't take a punk like you.
Like, so the big thing here is that Spawn doesn't want to use his powers, so he's just straight kicking his ass.
Yeah, seems like a fairly even fight, and we're gonna find out that part of the reason that Chapel is a young blood is that he took a serum.
It had some adverse effects.
Yeah, it poisoned him with HIV. That is a quote from the comic, and Why he remains a young blood, not entirely sure. We're not entirely sure. We did our own research,
We
much
did a
like the
little
My View on
research.
2 guy.
There's a couple things to note here about that, which the poison with HIV, just an awful thing to say, but also
timing wise, I guess this would have been
around
if
Magic
Chapel
Johnson, like
if Chapel did this before Al died, right, or right after Al died,
yeah, sometime during the Youngblood program. It's hard to
it
say.
would have been the height of the AIDS epidemic. I
It
mean,
would have been
like
really
timing
bad.
wise,
It's
it
a
would have
rough
been
line.
extremely
That's
bad.
a rough line. That's a rough line. It's a rough plot point. I want to say I think that's a Rob Liefeld thing because as I was doing some research, or trying to, as we'll discuss in a moment with Chapel, I think the premise was sort of a Suicide Squad thing where they injected Chapel with a version of HIV that they could activate if he betrayed them. So it's like, if you betray us, you're gonna get fucking AIDS. Which
it could have just been a bomb in their brain.
Yeah. That's tough. It's real tough.
It was the edgy 90s.
So Chapel stabs Spawn with his big weird knife, and Spawn's just like, how pitiful you've become, and says he didn't take the serum because he and Wanda were trying to have a kid. He didn't want to become a young blood, and none of that matters anymore. There's a lot of like, my family's very sad about this, but if I killed you, no one would care. You don't have any family to be sad about you. You don't have anyone to mourn you. So I'm going to do something different. I'm going to punish you in a different way. All you ever cared about was how handsome you are, your looks, your one night stands. I can fix that. Puts his hand, he kicks the shit out of Chapel, pulls the knife out of his chest, and then puts his hand on Chapel's face and says, it's time I even the score. Now, 8 hours later, Spawn leaves Chapel with his tracking device, teleports away. We don't see exactly what's happened, but 8 hours later, Youngblood arrives. Spawn basically taunts him and says, we'll see how tough you really are if you can keep this war on a personal level. Like, are you going to tell Youngblood about what just happened, or are you just going to eat shit and move on? So Badrock and Shaft arrive, and they're like, where'd the Cape guy go? How'd you get here? What did he say? And Chapel says nothing as we get this shot of what has happened to him. He is still wearing his little chain with his skull face on it, and he's holding that up so we can see that Al Simmons has burned Chapel's skull face into his actual human face. Whereas it was once makeup, it's now actually his face. And it's kind of like, it's not his skull, because his
nose is still there.
His nose is still there.
Can't be. He just bleached his skin.
Yeah, just bleached his skin. It looks like he burned some of his skin away, bleached it to bone, and completely bleached his lips away, and made it so those pointy shark teeth are really exposed.
That's what I was gonna say. He doesn't have those teeth normally, as we kind of previously established. And if you go by the cover of the issue, those are not his real teeth. That's a mask.
Right.
Normally. But so this means that we know that Spawn can transmute things, kind of. Did he use his powers to change his teeth into those teeth?
I think he did.
Make him ugly.
I think he just transmuted him so his face is exactly like what his mask looked like. Mask or his makeup or whatever. It's a little hard to say because he still has a nose, but like it looks like he turned his face into a bone.
Right.
There's like blood, and it looks like he burned
his little,
away some of his skin.
He kind of like looks like his little pendant.
Yeah, he looks like his little pendant, which is being held there to remind us of that. And that's where we end this two-parter, on this shot of Spawn's revenge on Chapel. Let's get into it a little bit, because whether this is canonical, how this is canonical, how this all fits is a little bit tough, because as usual, there's a little bit of a legal kind of hiccup between Todd McFarlane and Rob Liefeld, who, I don't even know how to begin to parse what their relationship is, have had some beef, had beef at some time where Todd absolutely did not want Rob to be getting any royalties from the use of Chapel in the movie or the cartoon. So they kind of changed him to a different character who is Jessica Chapel.
Right. First Jessica Priest, and then she gets
In the
like
cartoon, she's Jessica Chapel. In the movie, she's
right.
Jessica Priest, legally and in all other ways totally distinct from Chapel, who they give
Yeah.
him the first name, I forget. Jessica Priest, and then in the cartoon, the animated series, the adult animated series, it was Jess Chapel. So they kind of
Right.
adopt that, and that becomes a thing. Now, Chapel himself is deeply depressed and weirded out by learning about Al Simmons. And I want to go ahead and say something. All the information I'm about to convey came from a series of truncated Wikipedia articles that do not cite the source for some of this information. I want to go ahead and get that out there because, once again, I have not read Youngblood. Some of this I think takes place in issues of Spawn, but it's hard to say. Now that I've made that disclaimer, what goes on to happen at Chapel is this part I know. In Youngblood, I think 11 or 12, he takes his own life in order to get to hell to become a Hellspawn, like Al Simmons.
Does it work?
It does not work because when he gets there, he becomes Lord Chapel, basically like a demonic lord serving under a demon named Calcifer, Lady Calcifer. Now, if that name rings a bell, Calcifer is, of course, the name of the flame sprite that
Billy
is
Crystal.
Billy Crystal in Howl's Moving Castle, Miyazaki film, and which is, of course, based on a series of books. Just another borrowing a name from somewhere, I guess, or same inspiration, doesn't matter. From there, he becomes Lord Chapel, returns to Earth as a woman named Gazer. Here's where things get muddy. According to Wikipedia, according to multiple Wikipedia entries and summaries of the character Chapel, he becomes a woman named Gazer when he is brought back to life on Earth. Then, Gazer, the woman who was once Chapel, is turned back into a man, over which she is deeply depressed. Is Chapel canonically trans? There's a whole lot in there that's really fucked up. If you get turned by someone into magic, it's unwilling. I don't know. That's really a little tongue in cheek because I don't think that's the intent. Although, when you look at the question of whether, if this is even the case, and I cannot find an issue citation, when Gazer is depressed to be turned back into a man, when she's detransitioned magically,
Well,
it's hard to say. I don't know.
listen, Fox News would have you believe that this is the liberal agenda at work.
Well,
You know, I think the less said about Chapel, the better, because this,
I cannot cite an issue for that. It's just deeply compelling to me.
you know what? It's the one thing that makes me curious about digging into Youngblood a little bit more. Having read about the first 10 issues or so of Youngblood in my life, I am deeply uninterested in that. Listeners, if you have any interest in us exploring Chapel,
Or
I
if you
guess
have
let
any
us know.
information, if you know
Or
the
if if
issues,
you know anything about Chapel, please let us know because I I don't want to find out about this
I don't
because
want to
I
sound
can't
like
imagine.
I'm not an expert, but part of the reason I'm doing this podcast is because I haven't read 350 issues of Spawn
No, that
or
will
any
same.
issues of Youngblood, for that matter. So I'm learning a lot of these sort of side stories as we go, and I'm seeking out some of those issues and those citations, but Chapel, hard to find citations for. So if you know issues to track down that we can read, this is good to know.
Yeah, I think unfortunately what happens, especially with writing at this time, right? We're talking early 90s, with stuff like gender transformation that is by sort of unwilling participants, if that's kind of what happened.
Right.
It's usually seen as a negative thing.
Oh, for sure.
So
I'm not saying it's good to like be forcibly transitioned.
I know we're being silly,
Yeah, I
but
was
I
being
think we
I want to
can't.
make it clear I was being tongue in
Yeah,
cheek.
yeah. Whereas we were not being tongue in cheek about the E News character being the first queer character in Spawn
Right. No,
comics.
that's very true.
That is not. That is true.
That's true.
That's
That's
canon.
true. That's canon.
But it's
One thing I also
unfortunate
want
because
to
I
note.
think it's an annoying trope for big tough guy characters to have to get turned into a woman. I think like we see it in Earth X also, right? Thor gets turned into a woman.
I just think from an outer space viewpoint, you see this story of Chapel as a guy who kind of hates women and as like a womanizer who has a lot of misogyny in him,
kind of
and
makes it like a fable, right?
then he becomes sad when he has to turn back into that after actually being a woman. If you put just those two things together in a vacuum, it's an interestingly weird story. Not maybe great representation on any level. Not saying that at all, or even an intentional representation. I just think it's a compoundingly strange story that I've just learned about.
I think it's always really funny the little things that end up in these books that like are intentional or not intentional or just kind of happen. Incidental character development.
When a story is told over so many issues and so many years, and you put those two polar points together, it starts to be like, what? It's like Iceman gay, you know?
Yeah. Or when you read back, you're like, oh, Iceman, very gay.
Iceman gay. Iceman gay. One thing I will say is when they explain what Hellspawn are in this two-parter, they say he or she. So they say he or she can become a Hellspawn when they go to hell. And I want to say that just means that canonically there are no non-binary people in hell.
Right. We all go to heaven.
That's right. Because we're perfect. The thing I thought of that we didn't address is that Spawn actually kind of states in one issue, sort of closes the gap. I think it's in issue 12 of where he was after Angela zapped him. He got zapped by Angela's lance, teleported out of existence. We don't see what happened to him after that because that was at the end of the Neil Gaiman issue of the Coco Swiss. He's then back for the Frank Miller issue. In this issue, he addresses that he was in purgatory. He was in purgatory and then found himself back in the alley.
Right. The only problem is that in our investigation of Chapel, we find out that Gazer is not just the name of the woman that Chapel becomes. Gazer is also the name of a planet and also
probably
like
connected.
Also, there's power. There's like some power of purgatory related to Gazer that spawn from, again, cursory overview of these an investigation of these Wikipedia and Spawn Wiki and all of these things. It says that Spawn has never encountered purgatory at that point. These are issues that we will get to at some point at a later date, but yeah, it's unclear. It is a neat way for, as Todd has kind of said, that he's not super into the supernatural stuff of Spawn, which is it feels like a very dubious claim considering what he created. However, that is kind of proven by the kinds of stories that he writes. We don't do that much hell stuff in this first. We're basically a year through the book now, 13 issues, and like Alan Moore did it, and we met the Malbolgia, and we met Violator, and that's kind of it.
That
it's
is
more
the
like
part
a
of
story.
Spawn's mythos that it seems Todd is less interested in telling than in telling the part of his family and his loss of his wife and the way that these systems, kind of break down around him and how he fits into this weird sort of government murder team. That's the stuff that Todd seems to be really excited about. And it seems like that's why he let the Coco Swiss writers all go nuts with going to, we did see kind of purgatory. It's like the hellish waiting room with Billy Kincaid. And so we're left to wonder if maybe Spawn dreaming of that is him thinking he's in purgatory. It seems a lot like the Billy Kincaid being strung up in Sam and Twitch's office thing, where it's Todd being like, well, I got to answer it somehow. I want to fit those pieces together and have it be more compelling. Explain where Sam and Twitch have been. So I'm squinting a little bit, maybe smudging the details a little bit. And it seems like, the whole Spawn had never been to purgatory thing. God, someone just didn't notice that line in this issue before writing that story.
Yeah.
Is what it comes down to.
Overall, Flashback, what are your thoughts? Do we like this Chapel reveal? Do we care about it? I mean, we know metatextually that it gets sort of rewritten, but if you were reading it in 1993, what do you think?
Honestly, the thing
is it fun?
It's kind of fun. I like parts of it. it's tough to think how I would have read it coming out because, at least reading these two back to back, it felt fun because this is definitely a story that's like two parts, but the pacing is the overall issue for me. I
Yeah,
think it's an issue that comes along a lot in the first year of Spawn, first maybe 2 years of Spawn, probably, where Todd is trying to fit in these other writers and these fill in stories and trying to close those little gaps and all that kind of stuff. I think that the pacing because of that and having to recap so much and having to bring it back to, okay, now this is the Spawn story I'm telling, it suffers a little from that. I think if I was a reader in the time, I would notice that even more if it was coming out on a month to month basis.
yeah,
But in 2024, reading the two issues side by side and having them as a two-parter, it was pretty compelling. I mean, it was definitely felt like it gave weight to the whole story of what Spawn's been going through.
yeah. I think that a year into the book, we are at a point with Spawn where if I had to explain it to a friend and only these 13 issues had come out, I had run into a pretty big problem, and it's a problem that Todd's not had to this point with his work for hire. Spawn doesn't have good villains.
Yeah.
And Billy Kincaid is a great little one off, but he is a normal guy. There's not really any reason that Sam or Twitch couldn't have caught him. And it seems like they were about to, right?
Mm-hmm.
Malbolgia is his boss, but he's
We've
not a
got
villain.
we've really gotten Violator and Overt Kill, and those seem to be the two members of the like rogues gallery so far.
But even Violator is another stooge of Malbolgia, right? He's not the main guy. And we already know he doesn't really pose that much of a threat to Spawn. Spawn's much more powerful than him. Kind of the same with Overt Kill. He's a big guy, but Spawn is so powerful that he figures out a way to deal with him. And Overt Kill will return
Mm-hmm.
in, Avengers Kang Dynasty. But Overt Kill is, again, not established as much of a threat to Spawn after that first fight. It's 2 issues, we're in, we're out. Chapel feels like a character who can stick around for longer, right? Al doesn't kill him, they have a history. But it's interesting that they go with the, oh guys, it's cool, let's throw our toys all together,
Yeah.
right? Because we know that it's only going to cause problems. It caused problems when they worked at Marvel and DC, and it's going to cause problems for them at Image Comics because of course it is.
I think it's evidence, more evidence of Todd McFarlane feeling like the way to succeed in business is just be a good guy, bro.
Yeah, and I think the other one, and Al still has not clocked this, and it is a little frustrating as a reader, is Jason Wynn.
Yeah, he hasn't realized that Jason Wynn is the reason he was betrayed. He did remember him in an earlier
Right,
issue, but again, it's that storytelling being kind of so far apart.
right. And so I think if I was reading these issues when they came out, I would be like, "Oh, that's pretty cool because I can go pick up Youngblood and find out more about like what their deal is." And also, I'll say that the stuff with Youngblood as a team is a little endearing. I think Badrock's fun.
Yeah,
I think that Todd kind of gets the dynamic of that team a little bit. I don't really think Die Hard even really says anything. But
I
like
don't know.
Shaft is fine, right? He's kind of like
Very
90s
straightforward leader
Cyclops,
guy.
and
Yeah,
I'm the leader, right? Whatever. That stuff's fun. Badrock's fun. That scene is sort of superfluous where he's playing video games. It doesn't really matter, but I understand the framing of that scene with
yeah,
the voiceover aspect of Spawn's narration. Execution is a little bit weird, pacing's a little bit weird. I had a good time with this arc. It's nice to have Todd kind of back in the driver's seat in terms of
yeah,
what this book is supposed to be. And I can see, especially given when these issues come out, right? They come out right around San Diego Comic Con.
yeah.
I can see it being like, yo, did you read Spawn? Oh no, I don't know what happened. Oh, dude, they're doing like crossovers. It's crazy. Image is nuts. You
Finally
know,
revealed
um,
who killed him and stuff, which at this point for readers had been a year-long mystery.
yeah, yeah, yeah. And so that's actually going to take us quickly to the letters columns. So in Spawn number 12, we get a letter from a reader who it apparently it had been sent in around issue 6 or 7. So it's an older letter, but it could not be printed. during the Cocoa Swiss.
The Cocoa Swiss.
There's somebody who's like, oh, I figured it out. And let me just find this letter real quick because it's kind of awesome. And Todd says, like, you were the first one to get it, and I'm going to send you something. But this person really puts it all together, and it does point out something to me that is really effective about this book. So he says, you know, ha ha ha, I know it. I know who killed Al Simmons. And he goes through why he thinks it is. He goes, in issue 7, Spawn is a flashback of his murder. What he sees is a skeleton. Some might think the reason for this might be because associated with death. Not me. The skeleton and the skull. Remember, the flashback started with a close-up of the skull was the last thing Spawn saw. That means that the killer had something on his person that related to skulls or skeletons. Maybe face paint. The killer talks about being paid for the murder, making him out to be a mercenary, and they show good loyalty. Then, this is really crazy considering what we know about Chapel. This person writes, and he or she shows a good loyalty to the government and that big old gun of his. Well, one more clue, and this involves another magazine. In the February 1993 edition of Previews, the preview on Spawn number 12 says that the killer is someone we might know and that this saga might tie into another Image Comics. Add your cleverly laid clues together, and that gets us to the beloved Youngblood Merc Chapel. And Todd says, I'd like to congratulate, this is BJ Meslow of Bossier City, LA, Louisiana. And he says, just like to congratulate BJ on being the first guy to officially figure out the clues to Spawn's killer. I received this letter months ago, long before any of the solicitation hype and information got out. So his homework was done strictly on what he read in the book. Thanks for the support, and check your mailbox for a little gift. BJ, if you're listening, would love to know what you got.
Yeah.
And also, great job. The letters here are pretty fun. A lot of them are, and we've said this before, they're kind of taking jabs at other people who have been taking jabs at Todd. Just being like, that guy doesn't know what he's talking about, which is really, really silly. I'm having a great time tracking down all of these individual issues because we don't really get a snapshot of what readers were thinking at the time, but the letters really do help. The funniest one to me is we clown on Todd for the wife thing a lot.
My wife.
It is truly out of love because I do really enjoy that aspect of Spawn.
Oh, yeah.
It's funny that he hammers it home to us so much.
But as we've said, even in this episode, a lot of that is some of the best writing that he does in these comics.
Yeah, it really is. And the kind of opening where he stresses that this is not a revenge like story, it's a story about love, is really important. It's something that Todd's been very consistent about. And so there's this quick letter that says, hello, Mr. McFarlane. I'm writing to try and tell you how much I'm enjoying the early storyline in your comic Spawn, which involves you telling us who Spawn is, why he came to be. I now understand the reason why Al Simmons came back from the dead. He did not come back to become a superhero. He came back because he wanted one thing, to see his wife. I'm sure you're talking of a subject close to you when you write of love. I was surprised and disappointed when I learned you were taking a break to be with your wife and new baby, but I feel much differently now. About 8 months ago, I met a woman who has changed my life. Before, when I would watch television or a movie or see characters go on about love and the such, I would just accept the notion because that's all it was for me. It was an unknown emotion. I'd never felt love for another person that way until now. It is the greatest gift. So I just want to say I'm glad you took off for a while, and I'm really sympathizing with your character Spawn too. It seems you both know what really matters. Thanks for listening and good luck. Sincerely, Russell Neff of Fanwood, New Jersey. And so I kind of love that folks are reading this book and that's really resonating with them. And I think it's easy for us, having read thousands of comics, to be cynical about this stuff because sometimes the storytelling can be clunky and it can be like a little silly. And 30 years after the fact, this book has the reputation that it does. The character has the reputation that it does. 90s comics have the reputation that they do. But this is what it's all about, right?
No, I like that letter quite a bit. And I think Todd liked it too because he kind of was like, I get why you took some time off, and I guess you understand what really matters. And I think that's exactly what Todd wants to hear, is that what really matters is his family, making a living for his family, being with his family. And that's, I think when Spawn is mourning that so often, it's because Todd is keenly thinking about what that loss would feel like to him. And the only time he shows a lot of emotion other than like excitement or maybe mild frustration in interviews and stuff is when he talks about his wife. He's absolutely a wife guy. And it's very sweet. It's a very endearing way. He's not a wife guy where it seems like he seems to be incredibly possessive or shitty to her. Everything that I know about his relationship with his wife, and I'm willing to be wrong or told I'm wrong, is that it's a very sweet and loving partnership, and that's beautiful. And I think it's great when someone gives Todd his flowers in that way, recognizing that he's a
For
guy who
sure.
cares about that.
Yeah, Todd writes back, "Dear Russell, I'm glad that the story was able to touch an important part in your life. I know sometimes that many readers don't like to see too much mushy stuff, but in the reality of life, the love we have for subjects and people is really what defines us. Being a bit older than most of my readers, I'm sure I put stuff in the book that some people might not want to read about, but why people do what they do and why Spawn does what he does will determine how convincing the storyline is. Anything I can do to help you get into the storyline makes for better entertainment." Russell, I hope that you're still experiencing this great love that you found in 1992.
It'd be, what, 32 years now? So God
Yeah,
bless.
for sure. The other little bit is in issue 12, and we talked about some delays and kind of being under the gun. Once we get the chapel reveal, but we get a little thank you from Todd. It says, "I'd like to thank my great pals at Image Comics for helping me finish my deadline on issue 11. Last month we had an Image meeting which started at 10 at night and lasted until 4 in the morning. Besides screaming and yelling at each other, I also need to finish up 3 pages that night. There was no way I could have gotten that done on my own. So while haggling things out and telling jokes and having a good time, we passed 3 pages around Rob Liefeld's living room, each taking a crack at it. By 4 that morning, the pages were done. Issue 11 got to the printers on time. A hug and a kiss to Rob, Jim Lee, and Mark Silvestri. Eric was in New York, and Valentino says he's no longer an anchor. I just love Image." And this is really fun because I remember being a kid and reading old Marvel comics, whenever they talked about like the bullpen and they
Yeah.
had the diagrams of where everybody
Hmm.
sat and where they worked and
The
like,
mythologizing of the creator by Stan Lee, which is the only reason we even know what Todd McFarlane's name is, to be
true.
honest, because if Stan Lee did one thing, it was he put the people's names in the fucking books.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's why I read the credits in these books as well. But like it does make it seem it's why I think, when we were kids we wanted to work on comic books. I mean,
Oh,
we
yeah,
wanted to be in
absolutely.
those bullpens. And when I became an intern and I found out that doesn't really work that way and everybody works from home, it's a little bit of a bummer. But
It's not 1967 anymore. But I do
yeah.
think that that also speaks a lot to the relationship of the creators of Image and why you have stuff like them putting the Youngblood characters into this book, even though later on down the road it would cause, some legal issues and some hiccups and some money things. Because at the end of the day, I think they all thought we're in this together. Like
Right.
they can all be sitting around yelling at each other from 10 until 4 in the morning while they ink Todd McFarlane's comic book for him.
Yeah.
And I think that that speaks to that relationship.
Because also too, like they're getting to ink Todd's book that Frank Miller wrote.
Yeah.
That's like why they're all there. And it's like
Yeah.
this really, obviously we're imagining the scenario a little bit
Yeah.
more than it
Of
probably
course.
was, and we're probably looking at it with the most rose-colored glasses.
But just going off what
Um,
Todd says,
yeah, which even if that's a bit of the
if it's a bit of
sales
a,
the
sales pitch,
salesmanship,
yeah.
that's okay, I think. But Todd is back. And
The Todd father.
all of what we're talking about also really is what Dave Sim and Todd were talking about in issue 10, where the creator and the creation are not really separate ideas, and that you could replace Spawn's name with Todd's and kind of vice versa, and it still makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's nice to see that consistency. I don't think that we always get that with comics, especially when they're going month to month, especially with a book like this now that's getting passed through a lot of hands. And I'm kind of happy that none of the Coco Swiss writers um,
The Coco
tried to touch on that
Swiss.
stuff
Yeah.
because I think it would
It's
have
so
been
personal to
distracting.
Todd.
Yeah, and I think that is what's going to make it tough for other writers to get involved. I know that we will see more and more writers get
Oh,
involved
yeah.
over time. Any closing thoughts on these two issues?
I think the Todd father's back and he's swinging. He's swinging for the fences, even if he's not always hitting home runs.
Absolutely. The next couple we have another two-parter next called Myths, and I will let Todd tell us what's going on. coming up. The Violator returns in issues 14 and 15. The Violator returns to take on the medieval Spawn we met in issue 9. And then after that, Grant Morrison, Bart Sears, Art Thibert, and Dan Panosian are taking over with issue 16 as I work on the Spawn Batman crossover. So, we're going to get... He actually doesn't mention Greg Capullo there, and I believe Greg Capullo actually does those issues, which will be the first Spawn work that Greg does. So those are going to be a lot of fun.
Another guy who is as much a character himself as Todd is. Just
absolutely.
Well,
that's it for us. Thanks so much for listening. We've been Spawnography. You can find us on Elon Musk's Curse site, but also the other versions of it at Spawnography Pod, on Instagram at Spawnography. You can find me writing things about comics, hopefully, on Newsarama, and also maybe Popverse every once in a while. You can find me on, again, Twitter at PE Lightning. George, what about you?
Well, you can find my writing every motherfudging day at newsarama.com, where I work in the comic book mines at all times. You can also find me rarely on social media at Crypt Trash, wherever I have an account. So that's me. Yep.
Hell yeah. Thanks to George for our theme music. Please listen to George's band, Hypersleep.
Oh, yes, I do have a band.
You can listen to my band, Power Trash.
That's great.
Wherever music is streamed. That's it for this one. Next episode, The Violator returns. Till then.
For Todd so loved the world,
he gave his only begotten Spawn.
Spawnography!